The first people to get there were the French, then we defeated Napoleon and we got them fair and square in war.
Is it not the government's job to act in our best interests as British? I mean, are we allowed to act in our national interest anymore?
I don't think we are.
Quiet Riot.
Hello and welcome to Quiet Riot Sunday School, where we slow things down a little. I'm Andreou. Now let me say right off the top that Naomi's coming in from an island in Greece and Kenny is coming in from Devon. So effectively both their internets are powered by donkeys. And we apologise for the quality of the sound today.
And I'm Naomi Smith, and as ever, we are saying a little prayer of thanks on Sunday School to everyone who backs us to help keep this show on the road. And I need to let you know that we do have some pretty big plans for which we're going to need a little bit of investment. So keep your ears peeled for an appeal on that front soon. And yeah, in other news, making a rare Sunday appearance, it's our very own Celtic tiger, Kenny Campbell.
Yeah, with my own... It's not donkey-powered, the internet down here. It's cider-powered, and it's all the better for it as well. So hello, it's not often you'll get me out of bed this early on a Sunday morning, but I did want to let all our lovely listeners know that we're about to launch a live Discord channel for all our fabulous Ko-Fi supporters, and we will let you know shortly when all the cables are plugged together and the thing's working.
Yeah, we wanted a space for quiet writers to get together to plot, hang out with like-minded people, and to give us feedback away from the glare of social media about the things you would like to see on the show. So it's our own little kind of Quiet Riot WhatsApp group, if you like, but on Discord.
All three of us will be there, so if you want to flirt with me, praise Naomi, or berate Kenny, come and find us. It's open to all our Ko-Fi backers, and if you're not on Discord yet, just download the app. You're clever, you'll figure it out. If you're not yet a Ko-Fi backer, take this as a sign from the gods to register your support at ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. And if you're not in a position to do so yet, make sure to leave us a glowing review instead. Hit pause and do that now. No, I said now. Wasn't that hard now, was it?
And that means we can get on with this Sunday's show. We're going to be covering the faux outrage over the Chagos Island deal and some interesting local election results.
Plus, we'll be giving Boris Johnson the sort of publicity he doesn't want and recommending books to buy instead of his work of historical fiction.
Quiet Riot. Now, since the recording of the main show, there's been some developments between the UK and Mauritius on the Chagos Islands. It's certainly a victory for the international rule of law. Hurrah! Internationalists rejoice. And I would argue it puts the UK in a much better moral ground to criticise things like the Russian occupation of Ukrainian territory. But Alex, I'm in Greece, as you said. You're much closer to the news than I am this week. Give us your hot take on it all.
Well, so what happened was the UK has lost actually two international cases, both in the International Court and in the Maritime Court. And so we were in a position where we were basically heading towards losing control of the Chagos Islands on a legal basis without anything in return, if that makes sense. So there was a lot of drive to negotiate something so that the US base that was on the islands could stay there because it's strategically very important. And this is a UK territory on which the US has a base. And there was a big push from the White House to do that before the election, because the possibility of a Trump White House, who knows what his view would be on the Chagos Islands base. And so the British government did a deal with Mauritius to cede sovereignty of the islands back to that country, but keep the US base on them for another century, basically. And there has been widespread condemnation from various Conservative commentators, the Tory leadership candidates, Nigel Farage, of course, he couldn't not be part of that particular racket. These islands are uninhabited, by the way. No one lives there except the people who, I guess, staff that US base. You can't go there without a special permit. There are no commercial flights there. There is no, there's nothing there except that base. And so the British government has done that deal. All the Tories came out in garment-rending outrage. And it is important to point out that James cleverly blamed Starmer, calling him weak.
Right, but hold on. I mean, the timing of that, Alex, surely this reconciliation with Mauritius began long before the 4th of July.
Of course. Listen, the entire thing was basically negotiated, drafted, and ready to go before Labour even came into power, under James Cleverly as Foreign Secretary. The actual advisor that negotiated the deal said Cleverly pursued it enthusiastically. That was his quote. Okay? Now, Cleverly is blaming Liz Truss. Liz Truss is blaming Boris Johnson, saying he started.
He made
Boris
me
Johnson
do it when I was a Foreign Secretary.
Yeah. Boris Johnson says it's nothing to do with him. I don't know why this circular firing squad has formed. It's a good thing. Plainly, it's a good thing. And the most extraordinary thing is that loads of them are saying our American allies are furious, including Nigel Farage. The White House has come out in warm, glowing praise of the deal, saying it proves the wins that international cooperation and diplomacy can achieve. So none of them are right. And the sting in the tail, I think the funniest thing of all, is that the lead official negotiator for the Foreign Office on the Chagos Treaty with Mauritius is Lord Frost's wife, Harriet Matthews.
Well.
Amazing. I saw something, I think it was Daily Mail, it may have been front page even, kind of trying to liken this to us ceding the Falkland Islands. I mean, that's a complete nonsense, isn't it? Because no international court has found in favour of Argentina over the Falklands or Greece.
And also they are inhabited by people who largely want to remain British.
Indeed. That small little fact.
So yeah, there was a point I was going to make about that, though, that Britain still has, as a cast-off of its history, sovereignty over, 15, maybe 20 overseas territories. And in total, I think they're inhabited by about 300,000 people. So not a huge number, but not an insignificant number either. And for those 300,000 people, they must be looking at this with one eyebrow at least ever so slightly raised.
Yeah.
I mean, some of this, obviously we all know about the Falklands and Gibraltar, but there's places like, Anguilla, Montserrat, Pitcairn. I'm trying to think of others. South Georgia, of course, Ascension
Cornwall.
Island, all places.
Someone will say Cornwall.
And
one
Fort
of our
William.
listeners at least will point that out.
But, there is the more general point, which really does bug me, actually, is that on this kind of foreign policy matter, as in Israel at the moment, as in Ukraine, in all those things, there is a sort of convention in British politics that the leader of the opposition does not criticize the government unless there is a fundamental reason to do so, that generally they are supportive of foreign policy.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And Starmer observed that meticulously, some would say too meticulously, during his time as opposition leader. But what's happened is, by fucking Sunak vacating the stage basically in June and going, I'm off, down to you now, he has left 4 proxies vying for the Tory leadership, all of whom are tearing strips out of Starmer on Ukraine, on Israel, on all his policies. They are somehow not good enough without having to abide by that convention because they're not actually leader of the opposition. And that creates, I think, a really insupportable situation. And no one is criticizing them for it. I find that astonishing that for 3-4 years, Starmer, through gritted teeth, went, well done, Boris, on X, Y, or Z, because that's the convention. And now they're in government for 3 months. There are 2 regions teetering on the edge of collapse. And you have basically an opposition that's split among 4 people competing with each other to say the most fucking awful thing they can in order to appeal to a deranged membership that includes me. And that convention has collapsed in on itself, and no one's saying anything about it.
No, they're not. And it's not even just the 4, is it? It's also people like Liz Truss and Boris Johnson still wanting to have some shred of significance in our political discourse, piping up on all of these issues. Prime example being Johnson talking about there now being a strong case for a public say, aka or referendum on Britain's membership of the ECHR. I mean, if only it were limited to the 4 potential leadership contenders still left in the race. It feels like the whole conservative right movement, including, of course, as you mentioned, Farage and others, vying to spout the most populist, nativist shite about our foreign policy.
Yeah,
they have become these political midges and mosquitoes, haven't they?
Yeah.
I mean, they are the tiny little things that should be of no consequence whatsoever. But the moment you get the cloud of the bastards, there's nothing more miserable, is there?
The net result of having had 6 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, I don't know how many home secretaries, the housing secretaries are in the dozens, is that we're now in a situation where there's a whole crowd of people with former insert impressive title next to their name that are just infecting our airwaves like a plague.
Quiet, Riot.
So, Naomi, there was a little batch of local elections this week. What was the reason for that?
Well, the main reason is because a lot of Labour councillors stood in the parliamentary seat and got elected in July as the MP. So they're now resigning their
amazing
positions, and that is causing a whole host of local by-elections to happen.
Right, and were the results from this week notable in some way? I have to say I haven't been paying much attention.
Well, don't you worry about it, because I have, Alex, as ever, keeping a close eye on
from the pool side.
Yeah, elections. So.
How fucking sad are you? Sitting by a poolside, scanning local election results. I love you so much, mate.
I mean, I've never pretended to be cool. I'm not the cool one. I've never been the cool one. I never will be the cool one. But I am the data one. And that's my lot, and I'm fine with it. So, yeah, there were 4. We'll discount 1, Labour hold. There were 3 where Labour lost. And I think what it tells us is something quite interesting, and potentially how Labour might react, also interesting. So I'm going to start with one that was a gain by Reform UK from Labour in the Martin ward in Blackpool South. Does Blackpool South ring a bell for either of you?
It does.
It should do, because, of course, that was the most recent parliamentary by-election.
Yes,
that
Scott Benton, wasn't it?
That's correct. So he was ousted over a lobbying scandal. And Labour's Chris Webb was elected on an absolutely massive swing in that by-election and had a very comfortable hold again on July the 4th. And it was Sarah Smith who resigned the council seat because she, of course, is now elected as MP for Hyndburn. It is a ward that I think is probably quite stereotypically Blackpool, if you like. Relatively low levels of employment, 96% white, 57% say they are Christian. Average house costs about 130 odd grand. And for a local election, by-election, a relatively high turnout on a depressing sort of 23%. And the results were that Reform got a huge 30% swing to them to take the seat with nearly 40%. Labour down 23% to 28%, and Cons down 18% to 21%. And I think this is interesting because my fear is that you're going to see an overreaction by Labour to reform. Now, I want Labour to have a very, very strong strategy for dealing with the rise of the far right in our country and reform. And I do classify reform as far right.
Mm-hmm.
But there were two other by-elections on Thursday night as well. There was an SNP gain from Labour in the Lochee ward of Dundee, and there was a Green gain from Labour in, I think it's called Scotforth East, which is a ward in Lancaster, where the Greens got a big swing of 23% to take the seat with 58% of the vote, Labour down 18% to 22%. And this now makes the Greens the largest group on Lancaster Council. And so I guess my kind of appeal to Labour is don't overreact to reform when you are also losing voters to the Green Party on your left and to the SNP in Scotland. And it's a point I've made before on the show, but we don't have 5 years for Labour to turn things round in places like Scotland and Wales, and of course councils up and down the country have far less time. You have sort of 500 days off the big parliamentary elections in Scotland and Wales. So they are losing votes at the moment across the board to different kinds of parties. And I don't want there to be this kind of triangulation and the Overton window shifting ever further to the right in response to this increased threat from reform, where, of course, all of the reform second places are to Labour in the vast majority of their seats, sort of 90 odd as of the last election. So I thought that was an interesting thing to keep an eye on and for our listeners to kind of know about and to call out if they hear too many things coming from Labour that might be intended to appeal to voters that may otherwise be tempted to go to reform.
Yeah, no, that is interesting, especially in the European context, where this is basically what we're seeing. What we're seeing time and time again is that the rise of the far right comes weirdly at the cost of the centre left.
Yep.
What you get is a boost to something further left, and the far right then cannibalizes a lot of the votes from the left. And you end up in many, many countries with a choice between far right or centre right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly.
I think reassuringly in Scotland over the last day, Labour in general has blamed the Dundee result very much on the winter fuel payment cut and the ongoing row over freebies. So they've kept it to what you would describe as more traditional topics. I think there's another point worth making, just with one eye on Scotland in particular. And for those listeners who are south of the border, you may well assume that Scotland is a place where Conservatives and reform really don't exist. And that's not the case. Conservative voters have always been there. One of the issues you have with first past the post is that when you look at maps of Scotland, you don't see very much in the way of blue.
Because there's such huge constituencies that are covered by SNP and Lib Dems. And
that's right, the northeast and down on the borders where they've produced some very high-profile politicians over the years. But in recent by-elections, reform itself has started to show 6 to 10% of a showing. So there is an undercurrent, even in Scotland, of what we would describe as relatively far-right support that we need to keep our eyes on.
Quiet, Riot.
Now, the first rule of Boris Johnson is you don't talk about Boris Johnson.
Shite club.
The irony.
I'll be honest, we struggled with this one. On one hand, we wanted to give Johnson no oxygen. On the other, he's everywhere and hard to ignore. In the words of the great Emily Thornberry,
well, there we are.
So we thought we would do something different. We all remember Partygate or the illegal prorogation of Parliament or the gold wallpaper, but we wanted to remind you of some things that Boris Johnson did not include in his book, that he wants you to forget. And because I know that, as progressive and smart as you are, there will still be many of you who will reach for his ghastly revisionist tribe as an easy Christmas present for some Tory in your life. we will give you 3 excellent alternative books to buy instead. Now, Naomi, what's your chosen Johnson memory refresher?
Okay, I have 2, and one is going back 30 years or more, because I think it was a portent for things to come and is often forgotten. And that was that in 1990, Johnson, who was, had a budding journalistic career at the time, was caught on tape with his old Etonian buddy, Darius Guppy, arranging to get another journalist, Stuart Collier of News of the World, beaten up. Quote, a couple of black eyes and a cracked rib. And I think that is a portent. Anyone caught saying that kind of thing should have cut him off at the knees. That should have been the cancelling effect on anyone's political career. Not only should he never have been allowed to progress in journalism, he certainly shouldn't have been able to progress within politics to become Mayor of London, an MP, leader of the Conservative Party, and then Prime Minister. And I think the writing was on the wall. We knew that he was somebody who didn't think the rules ever applied to him, that the law was something that was there, for him to work around, and that he was all too powerful to be held accountable for the consequences of his actions. And he's lucky that Stuart Collier never chose to bring charges, even though the police were made aware of it and were the ones, I think, that told Stuart Collier about it.
And of course, it was the springboard for that famous Eddie Mair comment.
That's right. Yes.
You're a nasty piece of work.
Exactly. Right. He is a nasty piece of work.
Why don't we talk about something else? The programme also includes, this is about your integrity. Okay. The programme includes your reaction as you listen to a phone call in which your friend Darius Guppy asks you to supply the address of a journalist so that he can have him physically assaulted. The words beaten up and broken ribs are said to you. And you, having heard that, you tell your friend Darius Guppy you will supply the address. What does that say about you, Boris Johnson? Well, aren't you, in fact, making up quotes, lying to your party leader, wanting to be part of someone being physically assaulted? You're a nasty piece of work, aren't you?
Well, Eddie, I think all 3 things I would dispute.
Well, you don't factually dispute them.
Well, I do, and I could, if we had a long time, which we don't, I could explain that I think all 3 interpretations you're putting on those things aren't wholly fair.
In the 2 years and 340 days in office, he did his fucking damnedest to break our democracy. And you talked about the unlawful prorogation of Parliament and all of that. I think there was another one that really stood out for me, and that was when the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards found Owen Paterson MP guilty of breaking the lobbying rules. And how did Johnson react to that? He tried to abolish the Standards Committee and replace it with a Tory-friendly version of it. That's before he then, changed the ministerial code to protect himself and misled Parliament over lockdown and blah, 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 blah. So there were many, but that one was another one that really stood out to me. And as I say, it's just that pattern that we saw from him. The rules should not apply to me.
And what is the book that you would like to recommend instead of his ghastly one?
Well, if you have got a Tory in your life for whom you are tempted to buy a Tory piece of non-fiction, then may I commend Saeeda Vasi's new book, Muslims Don't Matter. She has now resigned the Conservative whip, as we all know. But she is a Tory and she has written a book, and I think that would be far more educational for the Tory in your life. Kenny, what about you? What are the worst instances of Johnsonism you can recall?
So I chose something that has absolutely no dignity when it comes to Johnson, because he's had so many faux pas over the years. Back in, I think it was 2019, it was the infamous fridge incident, if you recall, when Johnson was up doing a breakfast time engagement of some sort in Yorkshire, and one of the breakfast TV channels had a reporter, and infamously one of his aides was seen to mouth, "Oh, for fuck's sake," when the reporter approached Johnson, which I think is something that we should all have in T-shirts and just flash them to everybody every time Johnson's name's mentioned. But it was a portent of what was to come, because Johnson disappeared and hid in a walk-in fridge, which was, of course, cowardly. And we know that Johnson is an immensely yellow-bellied individual. It demonstrated how unprepared he was. It was a media appearance, for crying out loud. The utter ridiculousness of the situation. It wasn't going to be the last ridiculous thing the man ever did. It was farcical, and there was that absolute lack of responsibility that Johnson showed. Of course, it stuck him in the headlines, not necessarily for the right reasons, but did he care? No, he didn't. So Johnson in the fridge, I think that's about as much dignity as I can bring to this particular topic. In terms of what book would I recommend for those who are contemplating giving Johnson and his publisher some money, do you know what? Do everybody a favour and don't buy them a politics book for Christmas. Get them something that's actually genuinely useful. I'm going to recommend Knitting for the Absolute Beginner by Alison Dupernix. Apparently you can get this tome for about £5.57 on Amazon. And get them that, get them a couple of balls of wool, 2 wooden needles, and listen, at the end of this book, apparently, your friends will be able to make a cable knit cardigan and a stripy scarf. I mean, how fabulous is that? You're going to keep them warm and save their lives, rather than subjecting them to the bloviating arseholery that is Johnson and his bloody book.
Hear, hear.
Alex, what about you?
I mean, such an embarrassment of riches, right? Or rather, an embarrassment of paucity. I struggled. I mean, getting Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe in trouble, extending her jail stay by years just because he hadn't looked at his brief. He wasn't on top of the information and decided to shoot his mouth off is unforgivable. Putting Lebedev in the Lords against security advice, mocking the Defence Committee about fearing a ground war in Europe just 4 months before Ukraine was invaded is right up there for sure.
If you're saying, Mr. Elwood, that you think we should go back and prepare for tank battles in...
no, you're putting words into my mouth.
I don't know but you're saying that you mentioned...
But you mentioned tanks.
On the European
we
border.
Are cutting back on our tanks. What is amassing on the Russian border, right now on the Ukrainian border? It's tanks, arguably enough. Well, but that's besides the point. I'm saying step back, look at the wider security picture, look at our defence posture, and see what needs to be done.
If you think that UK tanks are the answer, then...
No, now you're going down an avenue.
You're saying that we should commit UK tanks to the defence of Ukraine.
No. You deliberately... I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you're taking us down this rabbit hole. At the very time I'm trying to make clear that there are bigger threats coming over the horizon.
Yes,
Prime Minister.
And I think what I'm trying to make clear is I think that it's now or never for the UK armed forces. We have to recognise that the old concepts of fighting big tank battles on the European landmass, which I think is what you're driving at, are over.
He prides himself on understanding war and war studies, and to call that so catastrophically wrong should undermine any credibility he has to speak about anything at all.
And yet it doesn't, none of those things do, because he's precisely allowed to come in and revise everything, put his own gloss on things. He's always given the platform to rewrite his record.
Yeah.
That is the problem here. So what I'm going to choose is the investigation of Priti Patel bullying allegations at the Home Office, where she treated her civil service team so poorly that there were extremely serious accusations. Sarah Alex Allen led an investigation and concluded that Priti Patel had broken the ministerial code. Patel was an ally of Johnson, so what happened out of that? The top civil servant who had complained ended up resigning, took the government to an industrial tribunal and was compensated out of public money for having been treated so poorly. And Sir Alex Allen, the standards commissioner who had conducted the investigation, ended up having to resign. So the people who were bullied and the person who investigated paid for it, but Patel stayed in post. And I think that really set the tone for his administration. We don't care what the rules are. We don't care what happens to other people. If you're one of us, you're living consequence-free. And to anyone that has suffered bullying in any context, this was an absolute gut punch. And so on that note, the book I'm going to recommend is Musa Okwonga's wonderful One of Them, which is his memoir of his time at Eton as a black man on a scholarship, around the same time as Johnson, actually, just after, in which he basically analyzes how these ghastly people are produced on a conveyor belt from institutions like Eton, which aim to make those children, in effect, amoral. They aim to instill in them that winning is everything. And what did we get as a result of that? Boris Johnson, in an interview just yesterday with ITV, being confronted with not having a scintilla of a plan for Brexit and yet pursuing it, and responding, I was just trying to win an argument.
Talk about Brexit is, as you say, a defining part of your legacy. It was chaos afterwards, as you acknowledge in your book. And you blame a lot of people for that. You blame David Cameron, you blame Theresa May later, you blame the EU. The one person you don't blame is you, and people will find that amazing. You told us that we should do this, and you hadn't devoted any serious thought to what came next.
Come on. So I wanted to win an argument.
We will drop details of all of those books into the show notes. So whatever you do, people, don't buy Johnson's book and either buy one of the ones we recommend or one completely different. But if we catch wind of any of you lining that bastard's pocket, we'll strike you off and cancel you from Quiet Riot with immediate effect.
Hear, hear. And on that uplifting note, that's everything, folks. Thank you again for tuning in.
We're going to be back next week with another beast of a main show for you.
And in the meantime, enjoy your Sunday. Remember, we love you, and we will see you on Thursday. Who am I kidding? It'll be before then, won't it?
Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads, with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou and Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Beep, beep, beep. Honk, honk.
The other problem with the fucking roadworks being just outside, they put a temporary light on, and so I get cars stopped outside just tooting their horns at each other.
Yeah, didn't mention that at the top of the show, did you?